I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation. You have the floor, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. President. As we have said time and again earlier, for Russia, this draft resolution on the climate and security is unacceptable. And I will once again explain our position in detail. The co-sponsors didn't want to and don't want to listen to our clarifications. They didn't want to talk about this in substance. They didn't want to hear any arguments, either from us or from other members of the Security Council, UN member states. We are against creating a new area of the Council's work, which establishes a generic, automatic connection between climate change and international security, turning scientific and socio-economic issue into a politicized question. The provisions of the resolution of integrating such a connection, and I quote, as a central component of the UN's strategy for fighting conflict, and also into the mandates of peacekeeping and political missions, could bring with it a whole range of consequences. Firstly, positioning climate change as a threat to international security diverts the attention of the Council from genuine, deep-rooted reasons of conflict in the countries on the Council's agenda. This is convenient for those countries that are actively helping these conflicts to come into being or who have waged military activity in diversion from the Security Council's mandate or simply don't want to provide the necessary help to developing countries. That said, the lamentable position of many of the most vulnerable states from a climate point of view is a direct consequence of previous colonial policies from Western donors. I turn to them specifically. How well you've thought this up, making people guilty of greenhouse gas emissions, but also the sun and the moon, and also suggesting that the responsibility for this is for developing countries themselves, but you haven't managed to convince us today. We also note that our Western partners, who are presenting climate change as a source of political instability, prefer in the Council not to draw attention to the other side of their assertions, namely the negative consequences of conflict as an impact on the environment, loss of biodiversity, decrease in forests, chemical substances, soil pollution as a result of military activity and intervention in the domestic affairs of states, require measures to re-establish the environment over decades. And this is, of course, very difficult. We are ready to actively draw the Council's attention to this issue. Secondly, the instability of specific countries or regions is because of a range of reasons, which each are very specific and can differ from each other in their components and also in their scale. This draft resolution doesn't aim to help countries or to work on any specific situation. Instead of it, it takes a general approach to the climate despite the principles of Rio and the 2030 Agenda. We have drawn the attention of the initiators to the issues here in this diversion of responsibility. It's clear what they're trying to do. Now I'd like to refer in specifics to those countries who, with the help of the initiators, have tried to take this approach in using the climate and claiming that that might help. But I'd like to quote here Pushkin, our famous poet, who wrote better than many about love. In one of his poems he said, "Ah, it is easy to deceive me. I am happy to be deceived." It's completely possible that a great many of the countries in need that are awaiting help from donors have fanciful notions about their potential saviours. Here it's difficult to provide any advice other than to turn to history. Unfortunately, it says that these countries rarely answer with a good intention. Many countries simply don't have a choice, however, and this position is imposed on them by donors. And then it's always easier to stay in step than it is to work on the issue in detail. Coming back to the attempts to create a whole range of mandates for political experts on climate, I'll explain in detail why this is unacceptable. It goes without saying that analysis of climate change in specific places cannot be carried out by without peacekeepers having their qualifications increased and in a very short period of time. The result of this dubious view would affect peace and security. And also, there are reports from the UN Secretary General here. This analysis would be questionable, to say the least, and the conclusions all the more so. Furthermore, this approach would be a ticking time bomb. To include virtually any country on the Security Council's agenda, that would be its purpose. And then the whole world would suffer because of this use of the climate issue. The real climate consequences would be a prerogative of climate experts and weather experts. This analytical work requires the proper training of experts, it requires technical equipment and a proper amount of time. You'll agree that giving political workers the opportunity to produce conclusions which could lead to the intervention in domestic affairs of states is simpler than anchoring a system of monitoring and rapid reaction to natural disasters in developing countries, and especially given the amount of money that would cost. Thirdly, the fight against climate change and the adaptation to its negative consequences is a question of sustainable development. The connection between the climate and socioeconomic challenges, in one or another reason, was supported by the absolute majority of countries who spoke in debates that were organized by the presidency in the Security Council, the presidency in Niger, which were also held by the Second Committee and by ECOSOC. For this reason, the substantive work should be carried out in expert fora, the main one of which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It is particularly sad, President, to see this attempt to shove in this draft resolution when there's a clear lack of consensus among the members of the Security Council now, when countries are trying to agree on how to implement the Paris Agreement in Glasgow and also on measures that really are necessary to fight climate change. The climate agenda should provide a unifying role to find ultimate success in individual and joint activities and not to sow discord, particularly to political ends. Mr. President, you very much know that there is no consensus on this resolution that's being put to the vote. You've received a whole range of letters from delegations who didn't agree, both members of the Security Council and non-members, who have expressed their dissent on this subject. We call on you not to sow discord within the Security Council on such an important subject. It is your responsibility as the presidency to aim to take effective decisions and not to sow discord. In saying this, we don't just reject this, we propose an alternative guided by a comprehensive approach which takes into account different countries and regions. There are many states who are concerned by these issues, in particular in the Sahel. Let us look at our alternative draft resolution. As has already been said, this region is a hostage to a complex range not only of climate challenges but also socio-economic and political threats that are exacerbating terrorism and which need to be looked at as a whole, considering the specifics of the region. If we really do want to ensure that the Security Council and the United Nations can help, then we have to be guided by that approach now and in the future. Thank you very much. I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement.